All right, so now we'll talk about the fundamental ingredients, building blocks of making a track. So no matter what genre you're doing, you'll have these 5 components that you'll be watching out for that you have to create in order to make it. So yeah, we'll quickly touch over those. And then for hip hop, there's one extra thing we'll kind of be going over in the coming videos. So I'll touch on that really quickly. And then yeah, we'll get into actually systematically taking each of these ingredients, building blocks one by one, and discussing how we do them. And we'll also go about making the track. So without further ado, let's go to it. So the first component of making a track, the first element you see is drum patterns and sequencing. So this would be like, you have your drummer in the background, like think of it in like a rock band. You have the drummer in the background, they have a little beat going. This component of making a track is, just what keeps the beat going with the grooves going. So that's the first thing we'll go over in FL Studio. Again, for each one of these topics, you could easily delve, 3 or 4 years studying the minutia of, different fills, different, at least for drums and patterns, different fills, how to, keeping the levels constant, maybe how loud or quiet you make certain cymbal hits on or off beat, what have you. We'll just quickly touch over the basics of that. So that's the first component of any track you hear. The second track you hear is the sound design and the instrument selection. So how the sound or how the track sonically feels. Is it more maybe a country vibe where, in order to get that country vibe, you need to have maybe, your acoustic guitar, harmonica, or you could even if you had the same melodic structure, if you took that same melodic structure and put it on, let's say, a piano or let's say a synthesizer, it gives it a completely different feel altogether. So this is the second area we'll be quickly touching upon a little bit. Again, for each of these, we'll have resources. You can go if you want to really delve into deep and really learn these things. Or that's the second area. Third area of the track, for me, I don't even care about the rest of these. This is probably the most important part for me, is the music theory, the kind of the melodic structure of the track. If you just stripped everything away and just played it on piano, how would it melodically sound? Like the notes, how each chord progression, as you'll see in future videos, is taking sets of notes that work really well together and that you kind of use them as the kind of background underlying context for which melodies play on top of. Again, I'll be listening to resources where you can learn more about these things, but for me, music theory is probably the most important, my favorite part. It's always been at least a little bit much stronger in my suite. So that's the third part that comes with making a track. The fourth part is the song structure. So even if you have a cool loop going, you got an 8-bar progression, the cool melody on the guitar or something like that, you can't just have that playing for like 4 minutes. I mean, well, I guess this is a hip hop course. I was actually pretty surprised, at least because I've been doing this for about 5 or 6 months. When I first got into it, I was like, there's actually a surprising amount of hip hop tracks that, they just make an 8-bar loop and loop it for 4 minutes. And I guess, that works for some people. But if you're looking, let's say you want to go for more of a poppy structure of the track, you want to be a little bit more intricate about how you're bringing in elements in and out at certain times. This is where the song structure component of the track comes in. And yeah, we'll go over that as well. This is actually probably the easiest part to learn, no problem. You don't need to spend a whole lot of time. You just listen to a lot of tracks like, this is when these elements come in, this is when these elements come out. Very straightforward. Final one, that by far, I think this is the one a lot of people struggle with. Maybe second to sound design, possibly music theory, depending on what your predisposition is to music. And this is the mixing part. Now, because it's such a weak part for a lot of people, some people actually outsource this part to other people altogether. As a producer, because everything's just become so much easier, you're kind of taking on the role of a mix engineer now. So at least I'll give you kind of the basic overview of what mixing is, where you can learn more about it. But basically, all you need to know about mixing at this point is now that you have the track laid out, how you have the melodies, you have the sound design, the drum patterns. Now, what's the relative level of everything so they all sit well together in the mix? So let's say you want a track where the kick's really hitting hard, but you want the bass a little bit more subdued. That would be something you make at the mixing stage. So you just set the level of the kick louder, quieter, or maybe, let's say the hi-hat's feeling a little bit too shrill, or a little bit, it's really grating on your ears. There's tools you can use to turn down the high end, what they call the kind of the shriller part of the hi-hat. So you turn that down. All happens at the mixing stage. This usually comes last. A lot of producers sometimes will do it on the fly. I'm just doing this kind of chronologically, so you can kind of get a sense, how does a track usually get structured out? Again, when you get really into the minutia, a lot of these guys will actually switch it around, you know, kind of reorganize the pattern. But yeah, these are the 5 main components of making a track. And yep, as I already stated, pretty much a lot of these areas, like I know some producers, when I start out, really looked up to, that's like, okay, so when do you go from the song production stage to the mixing stage? And a lot of them said, you know, I kind of mix and make the track as I go along. So you'll find that even though there's definitely components that, at least for myself as a producer, I've been able to say, okay, I'm segmenting out different blocks of time to say, okay, I'm gonna work on music theory first, then I work on the sound design for the music theory. Now that I have the music down, I'm working on a drum pattern, and I can segue it out pretty quick. There's a lot of other times where I'm like, okay, even though I had the sound design already structured, I want this element louder than that before I go to the drum stage. So sometimes you'll find these areas kind of fuse in and out together, and it's kind of a blurry, there's not a really distinct line sometimes. So that's just something to bear in mind. Again, in terms of determining what's mixing, what's sound design, something you really develop an intuition for over time. Just figure, just give you guys a warning of heads up. Now, for hip hop, the other thing we'll be touching on a little bit in terms of legality, maybe the techniques of that, is sampling. And this is actually the new part I've actually been learning about hip hop, and it's something you don't really see a whole. I mean, you see occasionally on the dance music, but nothing compared to the level of the level of sampling you see in hip hop. Where, you know, you get your MPC, and you just, you know, you chop up a sample, and you just go crazy with that. We'll touch a lot of that this a little bit. How you can do this in FL Studio. What's the legality of using samples? Like, okay, some people was like, I've heard that you can let's do up to 4 seconds, and that should be fine. So I'll be addressing those concerns in the coming video. So yeah, with all those fundamental building blocks, in addition to the one cool little tool you'll be using a lot in hip hop, we'll be covering those in the next future videos. Let's actually get into learning them.